Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. And please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, for our first meeting, as this is a fairly new board and new leadership, I just want to review a few of the meeting rules and protocol. And for the most part, in these meetings, we're going to follow Robert's Rules of Order for Parliamentary Procedure. We aren't legally bound by them, but it helps keep a fair and efficient meeting. And I just want to keep in mind that we don't want to become so strict in this format that we're bogged down by it. So we're going to use it to facilitate the meeting and follow that rule of order without letting it kind of drive us into a formality that's over the top. But right now I'm just going to review the rules for public comment. Do we have any? No. There's none for tonight, so I'll probably do this again a couple more meetings. But we're going to welcome public comment, obviously. The kind of protocol for it is posted over at the door. There's not more than 30 minutes total time allotted for it. There's a sign-up sheet before the meeting. It's kept to 3 minutes per speaker. There's no sort of personal names or direction given to the content of your topic. And it's all non-agenda items. And for the most part, for all part, there's no response from the board during public comments, just thank you and the next person speaks. So that's kind of the rules for public comment. And just a reminder about open meeting. This is a meeting held in public, not a public meeting. So there will be occasions throughout the year where we're going to seek public input on certain topics, but it will not be at these regularly scheduled monthly meetings. For that reason, we will not call on guests in the audience to participate in any discussion. That'll just be between the five trustees. And the only exception to that might be if we're discussing content where there's a school administrator here who has information we need on that topic. So that'll be the only exception. Again, a little reminder about agenda. We're following School Board Code 1500. In that, the agenda gets set by the superintendent and chairman about a week in advance, a little more than that. And there's a process for adding items to the agenda, so look at that. There's kind of a process, and you all should familiarize yourself with that. During the meetings, we're going to stay on topic, stay to the agenda. If the discussion starts to stray, I'll bring it back to agenda content. Formality, Carrie just asked a question. I ask each of you, how formal do you want these meetings to be? We can set the tone. Do you want me to address you by first name or Trustee Decker, or what is your preference? I'm happy being very formal, just calling you Gary, whichever you prefer.
I prefer it informal.
First name?
First name.
If it gets too informal, we can go back. Right now, we'll just stay on first name. When I call you to speak, we'll do it that way, unless it seems like you'd like to. I do not need to be addressed as Madam Chairman. If things start to get unruly, I'll tighten the rules back up. But at this point, we'll relax it a little. But the respect, we will always maintain a high level of respect for everyone in the room, for everyone speaking, and for obviously between ourselves. So I do want to add that I want to make myself available. I will not be calling on any raised hands from the people in the audience at any time during the meeting. But if somebody has something that comes up in a meeting that they just really need to talk about, I'll stay after the meetings for 5 to 10 minutes and make myself available and then respond back on an individual basis to them. It does not have to, I won't call on them during meetings. So that'll be just the standard procedure. So those are just some meeting protocol that I'll probably go over a few times throughout the year just to remind people, since there's public who attends the meetings. At this time, we're going to move on through the agenda, and I will, since there is no one on public comment, we're going to move on. I'll entertain a motion for consent agenda.
I make a motion that we approve the consent agenda.
I second the motion.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on items in the consent agenda?
I have none.
You have none?
None.
Carrie?
I have none.
I have none.
I would like to just say that there are a few items in here that are maybe new to this board. If you have questions about different bid items that are in the consent agenda, please feel free to reach out to anyone here about the specifics of those before the meeting so that you feel like you have all the history that you need going forward. At this point, I'll take a vote on the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. So we're going to ask for the 2017-18 District Transportation Program from James Kohler.
Thank you. Pass these out in case you want to write any notes, and I brought them as a backup just in case we have technical difficulties. Thank you.
That's a good idea.
And since I
Good plan.
printed them out, I'm not going to
Yes,
hold on to them.
exactly.
Oh, sorry. So, I'm James Kaler. I'm the Director of Transportation for the school district. Very happy to see all the new members, and it's a pleasure to present my program to you tonight. Before I get into the data portion of this, I want to just real quickly give accolades to a few of my team members in the transportation department that did some wonderful stuff this summer that you haven't heard yet. Slideshow. So every year we have a IAPT conference in Boise, and that's the Idaho Association of Pupil Transportation, and that's all of the school districts in Idaho. And part of that conference is of the year recommendations: best driver of the year, best special needs driver. There's, I believe, 8 categories. And so I submitted nominations for our school district, and we took home 3 of those for the state of Idaho. So,
Congratulations.
thank you. So first off, I want to say Don Hicks. He was awarded the 2017 Idaho Driver Trainer of the Year. Diane Scythe, she is the 2017 Idaho Special Needs Driver of the Year. And Shelby Montgomery is the Special Needs Bus Aide of the Year. So I'd say North Idaho did pretty good. Sandpoint Lake Pond School District is pretty well known down there in Boise. So I just wanted to point out those team members that really bring pride to our department.
Hey, James, didn't we have the Trainer of the Year another time as well?
We took home 2 awards last year and 2 awards the year prior.
Yeah, so
Wow.
it's pretty standard for. It's awesome, James.
That's great.
So it's great. So our people are really doing some great things, and Idaho knows it. And then finally, we participated in the state rodeo, which is the day before the conference, and we had a driver that competed in it, Anita Palmer, and she got 5th in the state
Nice.
for conventional buses. So that's 10 very difficult things to do: backup alley, diminishing clearance, and they're driving buses through this rodeo, the safety competition, and she placed 5th in the state. So I just wanted,
That's great.
I wanted to start off with that just because I was really proud of my team for doing that. So now I'll get to the actual program. So I don't know, can y'all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So each year in August, I present the 2017-18 Transportation Program for the board for approval. So tonight I'm seeking approval for this program. It's pretty hard to read it at that thing, so I'm going to be covering bus routes, safety busing, transportation zones, bus turnaround locations, payments in lieu, and daycare facilities. Those are the portions of the program that I'm going to present to you. And then if you have any questions along the way, feel free to stop me and I'll be happy to answer any questions. First off, I'm going to start off with the school bus turnaround locations. That is very similar to last year, with the addition of the one in Clark Fork here. We added that in the middle of the school year, and that was at the Montana state line, and that was due to snow. It just happened that at the end of that state line, there's this really big plowed area. And so when we had areas that were plowed, we could go to the state line and turn around there, and it worked out really well. So we'd like to add that as an approved
Official,
location,
yeah.
officially approved on our list this year. We just had to add it as a contingency last year. Next, we have bus route summary, and this, I'm going to try to get the whole thing in here and still be able to read it. So this is all of our bus routes. We have 35 numbered bus routes in the district. 4 of those are special needs, and then the rest are just regular routes. And when it says projected miles per day and projected number of students, those, of course, ebb and flow as the year goes through. So those are not concrete numbers. That's what we just project based on previous years and what we see on our TransFinder for what we think will be in that bus. But if it says 47, it could be 60, right? So we know more, we count more on, we have 3 mandatory student counts every year. And so those go, the state tells us, you know, a week ahead of time, you need to do your student count from this day to this day. And then that's really the concrete, that's what they go off of when we do our actual student count that counts for the state reimbursement. So
Do you prefer questions as you're going or wait till the end?
I don't have a preference. You can ask me a question if you have one.
I don't, but
I have a question.
Yes,
When you say miles per day, is that 2 round trips per route?
that's total miles per day. So that's, yes. So if it has 3 runs, then he's doing 104 miles in those 3 runs.
Total.
Total,
Okay.
yes.
yeah.
With a total of, at the bottom, so the total amount of miles is, as projected, 2,730 per day. Now, I did point out in red that Route 27 no longer exists, and Route 23 is now just a PM route. We made that change in the middle of last year. We had 2 people retire, and during that time, we looked at, you know, all of the routes, because we were going to do, if we needed to do switching, now was the time to do it. And we said, you know, 27 at one point was doing Lakeshore Drive with 26 because there were so many kids on those routes. So it was 26 and 27. Well, that population went down on that particular route, and we were noticing that 27 didn't have a very high count for students, and we could put everybody that we needed to on 26. So that's what we did,
Okay.
and that saved a considerable amount of money. 23, same situation in the AM, so we decided to go ahead and 23 was just doing highway stops, and we had Route 20 doing that same thing going through there, and like I said, the population had went down in that particular area, so we took that AM portion off, and now it's a half route.
Okay.
Are there any questions on that?
No?
Okay, this is the bus routes, what they do, where they go. It's really just a summary of it, just to tell you, okay, Route 1 does this in the morning, Route 2 does this in the morning, and so on, for what particular schools. There's no change to last year, aside from the 23 and 27, which I put in red and crossed out, and then next year when we present, we won't need to point that out. But other than that, all of the rest of the stuff has not changed since the last approved program.
Okay.
Bill,
Yes.
do most of the high school students transfer buses at elementary schools in rural areas and middle school students to come to town?
They do. Yeah. So we do K through 12 in the morning, and we pick up everybody. And then once we get to, say, Southside, we'll have a bus run the high school kids in, the middle school kids in. That applies to all of them. And then in the afternoon, we do separate runs. We do elementary run, and then the high school kids are transferred out, and then we do a second run. So we do 2 runs in the afternoon compared to K through 12 in the morning. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Continuing on,
When you say high school runs, does that include middle school students?
it does. Although they're ran out separately, they're not on the high school buses. The high schoolers are separate. We have the middle school kids on buses,
They leave.
and then they leave, and then we do the high school pickup last.
On
It's
different
two different
buses?
On
Sets,
different
right.
buses, yeah. We have high school buses, middle school buses.
Yeah.
Payments in lieu. So this is what we had last year. It was down considerably from the year prior. We lost a few of them, and so right now
It's like 8.
we're at 8. And payments in lieu are done when we don't have access to an area. But they're outside of the 1.5 mile requirement. And so we pay them either to that stop that we can reach them at, which is generally what happens, or if that's not possible, then we pay them from door to school. But of course, we want to try to get them just from their door to an accessible hub stop, and then we'll pick them up at the hub stop. But we pay them that mileage from door to hub stop.
I've got a question.
Uh-huh.
The last one on here that's
Yeah.
on Boise Street in Ponderay,
Uh-huh.
what makes that not doable? I'm familiar with that street, so
Sure.
I saw it and went,
It's a good question, because I look at it too, I'm like,
Yeah.
I know I'm going to get asked that question. So when students have an IEP that is either dangerous for other students or for the driver, or if there's something that prohibits us from being able to drive,
Gotcha.
then we will offer the in lieu, and that is the bottom 2.
That's a good question.
So that particular one is
it's an IEP. Okay.
correct.
What's the payment? Is it
It's,
distance?
it is,
or
we
mileage?
pay 55 cents a mile plus $10 a month. Okay. Going into safety busing, this was evaluated this past year. We evaluate it every 3 years. So safety busing is, I'll try to start from the beginning, so I don't
Give some
confuse-
history.
Let me give some history, okay? Students are either eligible or ineligible to ride. If you are in a 1.5 mile radius of the school, you are ineligible because you're within 1.5 miles. If you're outside of that 1.5 mile and you're in that zone, you are an eligible rider. However, there are areas that are dangerous for students to walk, and the state understands that. And so, rather than, so we're reimbursed for eligible riders. So every time we count a student as an eligible rider, we're reimbursed that mileage for that student. Ineligible riders, we're not reimbursed. But if there are areas that we deem unsafe by certain criteria, then we do that safety busing. We call it a safety busing zone. So we evaluate all those. We have a measuring tool, and it's based off of a score of 132 is the max potential for hazard, and we count numbers of cars going by, roads, all that stuff that is in that measuring tool. It has a point system to it, and the max is 132. The LPOSD breakoff point is half of that, which is 66. So if you reach 66 in that score sheet, then it's deemed a safety busing area. And so all of these were reevaluated. They all met that 66-point breakoff point, and we didn't add any. So that's the same as the prior evaluation. Everything's still the same.
Okay. And it's reevaluated, it says every 3 years.
Correct. So next
We'll
one
see
will
in a
be
couple-
2019.
Yeah.
Yep. Finally, this is the last portion of the program that I'm going to present, and this is the daycare facilities served. We have 10 of them. The reason we serve daycare facilities is because the state code 33-1501 says that we either transport from home to school, school to home, or to a daycare, which is so instead of going home, they can go to a daycare as long as that daycare is in their zone, their school zone. And then the state will reimburse us for those miles. So these are the 10 that we currently have as approved daycares that we will transport students from school to daycare, but you cannot transport from daycare to home. So it's either, so just a one-shot, school to daycare, then parents pick them from there, and so on. So that's why we service those. It's, once again, another way for the state to allow us to get reimbursed for transportation that they wouldn't normally be eligible for. So that is the final piece of my presentation. I would entertain any other questions, and if there are none, then I would recommend that our transportation program be approved.
So, questions for James, or?
Yeah, I just want to know the numbers here. I mean, how many students, how many drivers, how many miles, how many dollars do you spend?
Miles are right
700
here.
miles.
So that's, okay, so
1333.
we have 50 employees in the department.
Okay.
So, and that includes drivers, that includes flex drivers, that includes trainers, mechanics, and so on. There is, I'm not sure what part of the money spent you'd like to know. It's a big budget.
We could send the transportation department budget to each one of you. No problem.
Yeah. And I give you, yeah.
So when you say 1,333 students, is that the number of eligible students?
That's
Or is that the actual number of riders?
That's the projected number. It's not a concrete number, it's just a projected number. Our average ridership, our highest average ridership that we counted last year for the state was 1,010. So 1,333 is a little high compared to what we actually picked up, but that's only 1 week out of the year. And so if there's sports, it goes down. If there's not sports, it goes up. So it really is an ebb and flow, and there's you can project it all day long, but I wouldn't bet it at Vegas as to what it would be every day, because it's very difficult to predict.
So about 3/4 of this number is how many ride the bus every day?
No, yeah, that would probably, based on our count, yes, but it changes throughout the year. So like I said, our highest one during the student count, we only do 3 student counts, but it's a long school year, so the student counts is 5 days, and then they average that. And so I could show you our student counts for the state, but
So
yeah,
1/3 of our students ride the bus approximately?
that would be accurate. A little over 1/3, I think. Yes.
And tell me about your, the transportation you do for the activities.
Okay.
Well, I actually would encourage us to stay right on the content of this document, but there are some great questions, and maybe those can be addressed to James for a next, a follow-up or a conversation one-on-one with James, but we'll stay within the content of what we're approving here today,
Okay.
if that's all right with you.
That's fine.
Is that all right?
Yes.
Just within the program of what we're addressing today rather than the extracurriculars. But I would entertain a motion for this transportation program as presented here today.
I make a motion that we approve the district transportation program for 2017-18 as presented to us this evening.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Okay. And is there discussion? If there's any board discussion on the content here, we can also continue that. Terry?
No, I have none.
Anyone else?
And just to add to Trustee Suppeter, and the questions that you have, I understand there is a lot to know about the transportation. It's big, and so I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Sure. If there's no further discussion, we'll take a vote on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you,
Thank you.
James. And I'm sure there will be follow-up questions, like you said, maybe some follow-up on what transportation does in the realm of extracurricular and outside school hours, things like that?
I'll be happy to answer or meet with anybody at any time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, James.
So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Woodward,
All right.
settlement agreement.
So today I gave each of you a copy of a settlement agreement, but prior to asking you to act on the settlement, I'm going to give you a little bit of background as to what the settlement was all about. Excuse me. So you guys remember Tom Luna? He was a state superintendent of public instruction. And during his tenure, it was fairly tumultuous. A lot of, I think, pretty good things came out of that, as well as some pretty difficult times for education in our state. One of the things that Superintendent Luna was really pushing for was a higher degree of connectivity between schools in the state of Idaho, and he had a good technology background. And what they were attempting to do was I thought, very, very good for sure. It has not worked out so well. So this is what the settlement is about. If you've heard of the Idaho Education Network, or IEN, it was an attempt to, again, link all of the high schools in the state of Idaho via technology. And the idea was good, but the problem was that the contract for the Idaho Education Network went to two politically connected vendors in our state, and there was some violation of the competitive bidding process. So, and the contract was very large. It was $60 million. So you can imagine if bidding laws are broke, there were some hurt feelings amongst those that were not included in the $60 million contract. So what happened first was that there's a company by the name of Syringa Networks. They filed a lawsuit against the state of Idaho, CenturyLink, which is one of the vendors, and Education Networks of America, because they were cut out of the contract. And again, that move was determined to be illegal, of course. When that happened, we were able to go out on our own, just like any other district in Idaho, and it saved us a lot of money at that time. And it saved overall school districts millions of dollars across the state. So that was kind of the first phase. The second thing that happened was once that contract was declared null and void, against the state of Idaho, any school district or charter school who had filed for E-rate dollars between 2007, I believe, or 2009 and 2014 were named as claimants in the lawsuit, and that included us. So that I think there were 64 charter schools and school districts that were named in the second lawsuit that the FCC brought forth. So the state's been working on this for a long time, and the lawyers who are working on it for the state of Idaho happen to be Anderson, Julian, and Hull, who are our law firm. They have reached a settlement with the FCC, and that's what I gave to you all today. And I'm going to go over some of the points of the settlement, and I'm going to be asking you to agree with the terms of the settlement so we can move forward. From our standpoint, the terms are very straightforward. For us, there's not a lot of impact to it. The state of Idaho would agree to pay the FCC $3.5 million, and I did read that that's coming out of a fund that's a lot of people don't know about. It's called the Legislative Legal Defense Fund, which Idaho has about $8 million in that fund because they knew this was coming. The second term would be that Idaho and the school districts agree to withdraw and cancel all funding requests related to those funding years, 2009 and 14, of which we do not have anything outstanding, so there'd be no impact to us there. The FCC then on their end would release Idaho and the school districts from any further liability, so we could always move forward. Idaho and the school districts would agree to follow all E-rate rules and regulations, which we do, and we actually utilize a consultant by the name of Funds for Learning to make sure, and Matt works with them, to make sure that our E-rate, which is a reimbursable kind of a program for technology through the federal government, that we are following all those rules and regulations. Idaho and the school districts would agree to immediately notify the FCC and USAC if we have failed to comply with any E-rate rules and requirements for a period of 2 years, which of course we would do. And then each party would be responsible for their own legal costs. And for us, there were none. This did not cost us any money. This, between ISBA, they covered legal fees, and then of course the state of Idaho, because they were the ones who were in the wrong, are paying for this settlement. So that's the gist of it. So far, 60 of the 64 school districts have agreed to this. There's 4 remaining, and I think the last 4 are meeting this week to have this on their agendas as well.
So if I understand you correctly, tonight we're going to have a motion to approve this settlement agreement.
Exactly.
So we'll get the motion out there, and then if there's more discussion and questions for Superintendent Woodward directly about this and the content of it or the history of it, we can ask then. So,
I so move that we accept the settlement agreement.
perfect.
Second.
Second. So is there any discussion at this time on the content that Sean has just presented to us? No?
That doesn't affect our service. We have no liability.
No.
We receive no payments. It's just a neutral
It's a-
settlement.
It's just rubber stamping it. So all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
And the next step then is Kelly will just inform.
Yes.
So we are going to move on to, we have a first reading of some policies, and the first one is Jackie Johnson.
Before, and I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Hi, Jackie. And 2 of them actually are, we're going to have a series of just reviews of policy. And sorry, I should have cut this before. When Andra goes, hers are actually just reviewing current policy. And we have
Existing policy.
4 or 5 existing policies that yearly we need to review. And it doesn't mean that we will not come back for, if you guys actually want us to go away, make some changes, come back for a first reading to revise policy, then we can do
Okay.
that. Sorry for that interruption.
No, that's, so Jackie. And you can turn on, I'm not sure if it's on.
Oops, I'll turn mine off. There we go.
Hello? That's me? Am I on?
The
I can't.
little
The
person.
one that's the
The
voice
little
speaking.
person.
There we
Little
go.
man.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay. Welcome, and welcome to the 2017-18 school year. Here we go. All right. My name is Jackie Johnson, and I hold 2 positions, half-time principal at Southside and half-time director for several of our federal programs. And tonight, I've got before you Title I Parent Involvement, policy number 2420. And the policy, it's a requirement that we review it each year. And so in May, we bring together a district leadership advisory committee, and that consists of title teachers at all schools. And each of those title teachers bring a parent representative, and then we have 2 or 3 principals that serve on that committee. And one of the things on the agenda is to review this policy. So as we reviewed it, most of the changes that are on there are changes just to make it more readable. There are only 2 content changes. And one of those, the first one is at the bottom of page 2. And the group of parents were very committed to have the school parent, which used to be called a compact, be called an agreement. They felt that the word agreement was more friendly to the parents, and so in this policy, we've struck each of the words that say compact and replaced it with agreement. And then on page 3, under parent involvement at the very top, there's a rambling list of ways parents could be involved. And so we struck the rambling list and replaced it with Epstein's 6 types of parent involvement. And that's research-based. It's the 6 types that many districts and states use as their guideline. PTA, several other organizations, UNICEF, you name it. And those 6 types would be parenting, communicating, volunteering, decision-making, learning at home, and collaborating in the community. So that's everything. Any questions?
Well,
I have a question.
oh, go ahead.
On the first page,
Sure.
in the third paragraph, in this policy, the word parent also includes guardians and other family members involved in supervising the child's schools. Is that what it's intended to say? Supervising the child's schools? Or child's education or school experience?
Maybe it was schooling at one point, and yeah, it must be a typo.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, because I don't think the parents and legal guardians are supervising our schools.
You're right. Okay. All right. I'd be happy to make that change.
Thank you.
And I just have one question about the parents' engagement here. I love the reference to Epstein's 6 types of parent involvement, and I'm assuming that those parents of all these students are provided with that.
Yes.
They don't have to seek it out on their own, it's made available to them.
In fact, they recommended that we put the 6 types with descriptions and examples on the back of the compact.
Agreed.
Yes. Oh, you were right. The agreement. Change is
Right.
hard.
So, I know,
Yes.
so that they have it available
Yes.
right there.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't see any questions with the content here.
And thank you for reading it closely. Yes.
Mhm. At a first reading, there's no motion needed, so
Okay.
we will,
But in the minutes, you know that I've made that change.
Yeah.
yes,
Okay, thank you.
thank
Jackie.
you. Thanks, Jackie. So Andra, we have 2 first reading of policies from Andra. Andra Mert, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Good evening, thank you. It is a privilege to be in front of you tonight. And I do have 2 policies for annual review, and there'll be a series of a few more that I'll be bringing to you over the next few months. Again, we basically had language changes. I reviewed ISBA model policy, and of course we were in compliance. But I'll just walk through the bold changes, and I'm happy to field your questions. So I'll start with 2700, our graduation requirements. And you'll see the first bold, again, was an addition, some model policy language, but was already in practice for us here in LPOSD, that prior to registering for high school, our students are provided with the current graduation requirements, and they start making that plan indeed in middle school. So simply a language change. Walking through the required courses, there were no changes here, but to note, 46 is the state minimum in terms of credits, and you'll see those totals at the bottom for both LPO and Clark Fork. Sandpoint High exceeds those. You see an asterisk above. They have some additional credits of history and then additional electives. But there was no change walking down those totals. Flipping over again, there were no changes until you see civics. And again, that was simply a language change on the state level to be very clear about what the civics test, how it was defined. There was a bit of back and forth last year, and so they came out and defined that it is the 100 questions used for the citizenship and immigration test. However, you'll see, and this was in practice last year, but this bold sentence added to model policy that districts can still determine the manner or the method in which we give those questions. So typically we'll give a block of perhaps 25 questions at a time. It's up to the schools, local control, how they choose to administer that. And then from model policy, the bold there again, that this requirement still applies to students who receive special ed services, but it is governed by their particular IEP. The next change falls under college entrance exam. You see that beginning with this class moving forward, we can no longer take the compass, so that language is just updated to SAT and ACT.
I was thinking of a whole different policy.
And there was one, it falls under number 3, a new bold, that students can elect an exemption from that requirement. And the third was added simply if we had a student who enrolled after, very late in the spring, after administration of the state assessment, that there could be a waiver of that requirement in that rare individual case. Moving down, there were no changes. Moving through the middle school credits, transfer policy, commencement. And then a significant change under the ISAT language, or Idaho Standards Achievement Test. You see quite a bit of strike through when the law changed that students did not have to demonstrate proficiency on the ISAT. All of this then is taken out in model policy because that is not a requirement. And the model language I copied verbatim there, just in addition to obtaining the credits as outlined above, a student would take the ISAT following board rule. So took quite a bit out and updated it with that statement. So therefore, back on page 5, the new addition of the bold is a waiver of requirement, of which we should have very few because we no longer have to demonstrate proficiency. But it simply says it's a very rare circumstance. A principal may recommend bring it to the superintendent, a minor deviation from those requirements as outlined. Changes to 2700.
In my apologies, sorry, I muddied the waters. I was thinking about some other policies, so this really is, both of these have changes. So
Okay, yes.
if I just keep my mouth closed,
No,
it'd be all
it's good.
better.
But if you have, so the way the first readings work on these policies is they come to us with, as you just saw, some content changes. And the first reading is your opportunity as trustees to ask any questions, like you did point out any things that hit you wrong or discrepancies, so that by second reading, you've had all your questions answered and we can approve it. So this is the time to pepper her with really tough questions.
I have one, and she's aware of it. Under college entrance examinations, I think it's B3, the bold there, it ends with a semicolon and or what is my question?
They put these little things in there, Pearlie, just to
for
see
me.
if you're reading at that level of
Thank
detail.
you. I will update that
Yes.
typo.
Tell me
on my
what
first
page you were
screen.
on, Pearlie, I'm sorry.
Page
I
3.
It's on page 3. 3 is the
three.
top, the bold. It
Oh.
ends with or. Or what?
Thank you.
Noted. Thank you.
Goodness.
Yep.
I have a couple questions. I discussed this with Sean this afternoon, with regards to the section on middle school credit. I understand the district policy, it hasn't changed, and from last year to the 10 years preceding that, with regards to grade point average calculation, the district policy was, and I have letters from the district going back, that, students in middle school, were welcome to take high school level courses, and the high school level courses would be posted on their transcripts with grades and credits. But for the purpose of calculating a high school graduation grade point average, only those courses taken while the student was in 9 through 12 would count. And I thought this was a great policy. It was a policy which was inherited when I came here. It first of all encouraged middle school children to challenge themselves and take high school courses, either physically at the high school or through the IDLA or other curriculum providers. But, when they started 9th grade, there was a clean slate. No students started with any records, either, and everybody, worked toward graduation, on an equal basis.
So Andrew and I did speak about this today, and what we need to look into is that now what we have is the 8 and 6 program and advanced opportunities. And what we ran into the last week or so was some conflicting language in ISBA model policy around whether or not those grades will not only be transcripted but figured into the GPA. So Andrew's going to be working with the state on determining, okay, is this a law or is it a recommendation? So we'll come back with that for you all once we find that out. and
So
see.
Right.
I'd like to point out that, the graduating grade point average it's just an in-district number. When students apply to colleges, if they apply to selective colleges, the colleges are likely to recalculate the grade point average. They're not going to count PE, like we count, and they may not count some of the other courses. They may add or subtract for pluses and minuses. They may put more weight on core courses in math and sciences. This number is just basically an in-district number.
Understood, and your point is received, and I'd be glad to do some research. There have been some changes, particularly in advanced opportunities, specifically around what must be transcripted, and I would be glad to research the calculation into the GPA too.
That's
Okay.
right, because if you don't count the GPA, you don't transcript the credits, and some of those are being,
Well, we were actually transcripting the credits, but not putting them into the GPA.
For 7th and 8th graders.
Yeah. And that was our past practice, but now with advanced
Now
opportunities, we
it's
just need
changing,
some
yeah.
more clarification, and we'll bring
Yeah,
that back.
okay.
Yeah.
This was only applied to students who were enrolled in middle school.
right.
Yes,
Well, I appreciate the follow-up on that.
thank you.
That point for trustee Superberg.
Okay.
Okay, so
So moving
are there
on.
any other questions on this graduation requirements? Nope. Okay.
Wait a minute, this whole section was
Secondary route.
scratched, secondary route to graduation, can you give me some background on that? Why the ISAT no longer applies? And
Sure, that came forth with language that you can see in the first paragraph there. In order to graduate, all students must show proficiency on the ISAT, and so then it outlines all sorts of scenarios if students didn't. But that law was then changed, so none of these cases would now apply.
Oh, so there's no
So
exceptions?
you don't need all the exceptions because they no longer have
We
to.
no longer require proficiency on the ISAT.
So do the sophomores take the ISAT, the comprehensive ISAT?
Correct.
Every one of them.
And if they pass, they're
With
done. If
one
they
IEP.
don't, they retake it. They're even given, remedial instruction to help them pass it on subsequent examinations.
Showing proficiency is no longer a requirement, correct? We are required to participate, and we report our participation rate to the state, but students are no longer required to pass with a proficient score
Oh, they don't have to pass.
at the state level. So this is a language change at the state level.
Mhm.
Yes.
No, I guess I'd like some feedback from Sean about that. I mean, is passing a high school level competency test, a reasonable requirement for graduation?
Well, the issue with that is, there's very few states most states have backed off of that now because there's some disagreement as to whether or not that actual test should be the tipping point as to whether or not a child gets to graduate from her high school. So I like the local control and the trust that we place in our educators that are saying, yes, they're passing all of these courses with in all of these different subject areas with this number of credits. And to me, in my opinion, it's a shame when you have let's just use one example, a child who's shown proficiency in all of the courses and content areas, but really struggles with online testing and has severe testing anxiety or something like that. But day in and day out in a standards kind of based environment, they're shown that they can do it. So from my standpoint, I'm glad the state backed off from that requirement.
Okay.
So moving over to 3295.
Yep.
So this is a hazing, harassment, intimidation, bullying, cyberbullying, and menacing. And again, it's up for just a yearly review. There were minor language changes as well, but we were already in compliance with all of the pieces that you'll see here. The first was simply a paragraph, the second paragraph about the board with some language and model policy that spoke clearly about an expectation that students treat each other with civility and respect. And again, I copied that exactly from model policy, but would be open to your suggestions and feedback.
Did Pearlie already strike the S?
Did you find a typo?
Harmful to another student's.
Oh, Thank you.
And just, it's an S.
Oh,
I thought
two.
Pearlie would be all over that.
Thank you. Noted.
Okay.
Thank you.
I wanted to give him first shot at the S.
I got to leave something.
Moving down, again, there was explicit calling out of notification, which we already did this process, but it says that information on our bullying policy and relevant procedures should be provided at the beginning of the school year to personnel, parents, students. It's in our student handbook. We do always discuss this at a fall admin retreat, make sure that that's part of their process. And that information should, of course, be at the student's appropriate age. But we are already doing that, but it was called out, and I thought a nice piece to put in writing. Procedures, we do have procedures, which again we'll review as an administrative team this fall, but they are compliant with everything you see here, that they include descriptions of prohibited conduct, investigation procedures, rules for disciplining students. And so at the bold are simply language changes.
Okay.
And then flipping over to page 2, I can speak to this because I'm the one who does it, but there's a requirement that we annually report bullying incidents to the State Department of Ed on a specific template that they provide. So I work with all of our principals and use our kind of data warehouse to report true bullying incidents without any students' names, but they ask by grade, by gender, and if it's a first offense or repeated offense. And just for your information, last year we reported 34.
So is that something that when you do supply it to the state, you could also make it available to the board as an information piece?
Certainly.
Just so that the board has a awareness of, you know, year to year, this is one of the things that came up in our ISBA training
Yeah, I'd be
down
interested
at Coeur
in seeing
d'Alene.
the scale and the scope of the
Sure.
violation.
Not as an action item, but as a piece of information.
Another piece I want to highlight, it's not specifically a language change, again, it's just kudos to our staff. You know, with our focus on social emotional learning, we implemented the second step program last year, specifically at elementary. K6, it has a module that specifically teaches bullying prevention, and our students learn the 3 R's to recognize bullying, report, and refuse. So I'm excited to track our data going forward as we're putting that in place.
Great. Well, thank you, Andra. So that's wrapping up our, we don't have any questions for Andra. So there's an opportunity for announcements from principals. Jackie, do you have anything? Anything to announce?
We're moving forward with STEAM. We are very near, we're a lesson template apiece away from being STEAM certified staff, so that's
Great.
awesome.
That is awesome. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to thank David Brinkman with ISBA. Did a phenomenal job today, I thought, with the training. And you know, before you have a training like that, we're like, oh my gosh, 3 hours, right? Here we go. I thought the 3 hours went really fast, and I appreciate your all participation. And it was on roles and responsibilities, and I think felt like there was some good, you know, just going through that together. You could feel some good team building going on too, I believe, and things like that. So thank you very much for your participation. Thanks, David.
You guys did a great job, so thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
That's all I have.
Meeting adjourned.